Okay, Brian, we're live. Thanks for joining me this afternoon. As I always do, like to give the guests the floor to start off the podcast. Why don't you introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and what you do in the company that you run?
Thank you, Connor. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast. I appreciate it. So, my name is Brian Montes. My current company that I operate is called Scaleocity Works, but we'll start with my backstory. So, I started my corporate career in 2007. No, not 2007, 1997. So,
Mm-hmm.
a little further back. Started my corporate career in 1997. And I started out in a Fortune 500 company. So, I went to work for a big Fortune 500 engineered manufactured products company and started in sales. So, spent the first couple of years in sales and then migrated into supply chain. So after 2 years of running a sales territory in Southern California, my boss moved to Wisconsin and said, "Hey, do you want to take over supply chain for our divisions?" Yeah, that'll be great. I'll learn a lot, get to travel some. It's, sound like a really great opportunity. And ultimately it was. So I spent the next 10 years running supply chain for the company that I worked for. Spent every quarter in Asia. I was in China, Taiwan, South Korea, you name it, because we had manufacturing going all over the place. So that was a great experience, but I'll never forget my first trip over. I'm all of 29 years old, and at this point in my life, I'd only been out of the country a couple of times. And so all of a sudden, I'm taking a trip to Taiwan. And I'm thinking, all right, I work for a big company. I'm going to get training. I'm going to have support. I'm going to have I'm going to have what I need.
Mm-hmm.
And no, not quite. I got three things. I got a plane ticket to Taiwan, a hotel reservation at the Hyatt Taipei, and a phone number to call when I landed. I'm like, all right,
Okay.
guess I'm figuring this out. so,
Yeah.
so that was the opening experience to not realizing it back then, but that was the opening experience I had to realizing that sometimes companies don't always set their employees up for success. So, in any event, figured it all out. So, had a good run at that company. In 2007, I left the Fortune 500 world and I went to work for a startup. It was an entrepreneurial startup. I went to work for the founder directly. He was based out of Atlanta, and worked with him. When I joined his company, I joined him primarily because I saw the vision he had and what he wanted to accomplish with his startup, which was critical. Because I went to work for him over opportunities with other big companies. But I wanted to take a look at what the entrepreneurial business looked like versus working for a big structured old legacy type company.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to work for this company, and we took it from a few employees and a little bit of revenue to 100 million a year in sales and 150 plus employees. And so that was a huge learning curve in terms of how businesses scale, how businesses grow, what goes right, what goes wrong. And ultimately, that business did go wrong. The founder had a lot of demons that came back to haunt him later on. And unfortunately, that company that we scaled very quickly on a hockey stick level to 100 million came right back crashing down. So there were a lot of lessons to learn there. So now we're around 2012, and I've got almost 1,000,000 miles with Delta, and my kids are hitting their teen years. And
Mm-hmm.
as I wrapped up that chapter, I told my wife, I said, I don't want to be on the road anymore. I can't do this anymore. Because I'd always traveled. For my corporate career, this other job, I was always on the road. And I told my wife, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And she said, okay, no problem. What do you want to do? So launched a consulting firm with a business partner. We did that for a few years, and then we parted ways. And 2017, 2018 rolls around, and I decided to launch Scaleocity Works, which we are an HR management firm and a consultancy firm. So we are helping, typically seven-figure business owners figure out how to put the right people in the right seats so that they can increase revenue by employee and grow their companies. So there's a couple sides to what we do. We do a lot of the tactical HR work. We'll do all the handbooks, we'll do all the policies, procedures, we'll do all that foundational stuff that's necessary, especially if you do business in California.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other side is really the fun stuff, the strategic, HR, people operations, and business consulting, where we're working to figure out, okay, you think your business is going to grow X amount over the next 3 years. What do you have in terms of bench strength? What positions are going to need to get created as your company grows that you don't have today? Do we have the bench strength to upskill and train somebody into that role? Do we need to go out and hire for that? Or a lot of that strategic planning that goes into the people operations side of growing a business. So that's us. That's what we do. Based here in California, but we can work all over the U.S. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy what we do.
Yeah, so no, I appreciate that context, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to when you made the switch from a corporate career to working for an entrepreneur, and I'm curious why you chose to do that. If there was a specific reason or
There was.
gut feeling.
No, there was. And it's interesting because by nature, by design, my DNA, right? My dad grew up and spent a lot of time with the same company, right? Got the retirement, got the watch, all the typical stuff of the previous, era. And so that's the way I was raised, right? I originally thought when I went to work for the big Fortune 500 company, I was going to retire out of there. I'm like, we'll end up moving wherever throughout in the country, but I'm staying here for life, right? Stock options, company car, all that stuff. But the reason I left that organization is because I started dreading Mondays. It got to a point where Sunday would come around and I did not want to go to work on Monday. I really just a lot of things had changed there and it wasn't fun anymore. I wasn't learning, I wasn't growing, and I felt stagnant. And my wife, God bless her, she said, you're not happy here. I don't care about the steady paycheck. I don't care about the company car or the credit card. We got to figure something out because you can't do the next 20, 30 years of your career being miserable. So she's really the reason that I made that decision to leave. And when I left, I had other opportunities. I had a couple of recruiters I was working with, and I had a job opportunity come across for another big company. And it was I thought it was going to work out, and I got the job offer. It all came down at the same time. So the founder of the startup that I went to work for reached out to me, flew me back to West Virginia to meet with him. And at the same time, I got the job offer from this other big company. And the job offer came in and it was clearly laid out, my salary, my comp package, everything. Then it stated that after 2 years, we would have to relocate to the Midwest, which we were fine with doing. That we'd relocate to the Midwest and I'd move to the corporate office, but that I would also take a pay cut when moving to the corporate office of $25,000 a year. And I'm reading this in my offer letter. I'm going, are you nuts? Just because I'm going to a lower cost center doesn't mean I should take a pay cut for more work. And that really was the catalyst where I said, okay, something's got to change here. And that's why I went the entrepreneur route. I figured, one, the owner of the startup offered me a really nice package. Two, I felt that working for a smaller company, I would have a bigger impact. I wouldn't be, a small fish in a big pond. I could actually make an impact with where I was headed. And I truly believe that by going that route, I was going to learn a lot more about business than if I went back to another big company. So those were my deciding factors.
In that same vein, you said you dreaded Mondays and now you consult with companies on how they should hire. So how do you work with executives, founders to make sure that they don't have that culture, they don't have employees in that situation where they want to quit, they want to go somewhere else?
It's a great question. And today is far different than it was, even 5 years ago, but 10 or 15 years ago. It's more accepted and normal that people are going to be moving around every few years, right? That's become the norm because you can either stay somewhere and get a 2 or 3% raise, or you can move on and get 15 or 20% every 3 years. So business owners now have to work even harder to keep their talent because the desire and inkling and opportunity to move is there, and it's more of a cultural norm now. So, and there's no utopia, right? You're not going to go to work every single day and say, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, right? There's going to be ups and downs. But one of the things you have to focus on when building a culture that's functional is making sure that the good days outweigh the bad days, right? It has to be the downs have to be the exception and not the rule, right? And a lot of it's done with making sure that you build systems that allow for some autonomy of your employees while still having accountability. It requires being able to create an environment where micromanagement isn't necessary. Now, and I tell business owners this, and it's something I've learned and that I actually do. It's your business. It's okay to micromanage it, but you micromanage the processes and the outcomes you want, not the people. Right? You've got to have your team, your employees need to have some free reign to do what they need to do, but you still need to have those checks and balances and to make sure that if things get off the rails, it can be caught early enough. And one of the other key things to building a culture that actually becomes a winning culture and works is the coaching and feedback perspective, right? So people want professional development. They want to be able to learn. They want to be able to grow. And so if you have an environment where they feel stagnant, they're going to move on. Right. But if you're constantly providing coaching, feedback, development opportunities, that's another key component to an environment where people are going to be a little bit more interested and excited about the environment they're working in. And the other aspect to it is creating an environment where making a mistake and failure is okay, right? Now, obviously, we don't want the same mistakes and the same failures over and over, but you've got to give some runway to allowing your team. They're going to grow by making mistakes. We all make mistakes. I make them every single day. And so it has to be an environment where you're not penalized for making a mistake. Your team's going to make some wrong decisions, right? But if you've put the framework in place, it will hopefully reduce the impact of a wrong decision. So, but you have to create an environment where they know they can make a decision, and if they're wrong, they're not going to get fired or written up, or right. There's some opportunity to learn that way. So, those are some of the key things.
Would you say, you just listed off 4 or 5 things, executives and founders you work with, would you say that they already have those in their mind, in their plan, and they just haven't written them down? Or do you need to clearly call those out for them to realize, like, hey, I need a really succinct plan to grow a team that's going to help me grow my company?
Oh, it varies. Some know it and don't know how to execute it. Some don't know it at all. Some are afraid to delegate, right? Because you get the syndrome of nobody can do it better than me. So it's a mixture of all of the above.
Okay. No, I think that's fair. I want to go back. You talked about how it's more commonplace for people to leave careers these days. I want to kind of flip that from the employee side. I mean, do you also see the job market with remote work coming up, and people always looking to leave, and the ability to apply easily to hundreds of jobs online? Is there a lot more competition for those that are trying to move to the next startup or take that step in their career?
From a job seeker's perspective, I think yes, it's definitely a competitive landscape, right? There's a lot of people out there that are seeking opportunities, so it is competitive. And in terms of finding those new opportunities, a lot of it is going to boil down to the network that you have, right? So there's so many other ways for companies to recruit outside of just digital platforms now, right? You can recruit on Twitter. You can find great talent all over the place. So it's really important for a job seeker to make sure that they look at the companies that they are interested in working for and where are those companies spending their time, right? If that company you work for spends those executives and those hiring managers spend a lot of time on Twitter or LinkedIn, you're going to want to make sure you connect with them on those platforms.
Yeah. Would you say it's a fair statement that you can no longer just submit a resume and a cover letter and hope for the best?
100%, because I think at some point in time, resumes are going to become extinct. LinkedIn really is the resume, and so many recruiters spend their time on there. And I feel bad for job seekers. It's a tough market, regardless. It's always a tough market because there's always going to be a lot of candidates. And if you don't have a connection or a relationship or referral into that company, you send your resume and it's going into a black hole, right? And you're hoping that some keyword thing isn't punching you out, or it's crazy. I see super talented people going through job interview processes, and they get to that second and third stage, and it's always, well, we're sorry, this one person just had a little bit more than you, or it's definitely very competitive, and it can be very, for candidates, I know it can be very very almost depressing, right? If you start getting a lot of rejections, so it's tough.
Yeah. So, I mean, any words, like what about for people that are going through that rejection, what should they do? I mean, do you just keep taking at bats, or just keep reaching out to people and eventually something will stick? Or what do you do if you've been searching for a while and nothing's coming to fruition?
That's a great question. I think if you've been searching for a while, you'll have to take a step back and figure out what's not working, right? If you've been at it for 3 or 4 or 6 months and you're just getting rejection after rejection, the one thing you should absolutely be doing is asking for feedback every single time. Doesn't mean you're always going to get it, but hopefully the hiring manager or the recruiter, whoever you're dealing with, that final decision maker will give you just a little bit of feedback, because that's how you're going to improve for the next one. So if you're not asking for feedback, start doing that right away. Thank you for the opportunity. If you wouldn't mind, could you just give me a couple of sentences as to why I wasn't selected? What can I do differently next time to improve my chances? This way you start leveling up every single time that you go for a new opportunity. So that's my number one piece of advice.
Yeah. And I think that's easily actionable, right? I mean, it's just a simple thing. It's just one follow-up. No, so I think that's interesting from a job seeker's perspective. Another thing I want to go back to in your story, you talk about how you hate travel. Right now, obviously, we're recording a podcast virtually. We're in different areas of the country. COVID accelerated remote work. Do you ever see us going back to pre-COVID levels? And then secondly, maybe the flip side of that, do you ever see travel going away almost completely, where business and deals are done almost completely virtually? What do you think the future holds?
I'm going to say, well, first of all, let me clarify. I love travel, right? It's a
Okay.
huge globe, love travel.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what had happened was, almost 1,000,000 miles with Delta, and I wasn't always able to take my family with me. So I was gone a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
when the kids were hitting the teen years, I wanted to be around more. But I have started traveling. I was in Seattle 2 weeks ago for business. So I really do enjoy travel. It just got to be too much early on in my career. So, but in terms of your first question about the office, I don't think we're ever going to go back to what it was pre-COVID, where we're in the office 5 days a week. I think there's going to be this, where we're at now is probably where it's going to settle for a while, where it's this hybrid model, right? And the problem that employers have is you've got a couple of issues. If you force an RTO, return to office, you're going to destroy your morale, right? If you just say you're coming back in the office, no, it's not open for debate. You're going to destroy your morale. You're going to irritate people. And especially if you bring them in just to get in on Zoom meetings, right? Somebody doesn't want to drive into the office just to get on a Zoom meeting. And utilizing the caveat of, we want to bring you back in the office for culture, is a load of BS, because, all COVID did was show that we had some real leadership issues pre-COVID, right? So how you manage and lead your team remotely, yes, it's a little bit differently, but the right person can be equally as productive remote as they can in the office. I walked into a customer service room at a client pre-COVID, and half his team was watching Netflix instead of working.
Yeah.
So, and they were on site, right? They were in the office. So I believe where we're headed is this hybrid model, where you're going to go in the office 2 or 3 days a week, and you'll have a couple remote days. And I see that's what a lot of our clients are doing, right? Monday, Friday, you can work remote. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, come on in the office, because there is something to be said for that in-person interaction. It's very difficult to get that spontaneous conversation over Slack or Microsoft Teams, right? It's so that there is value in that interpersonal, just kind of being in the same building. So I think that's where we're headed for a while. Obviously, some businesses can't be fully remote, right? If you're in food manufacturing, or you're retail, or you're making aerospace parts, right? Certain things can't be done in your living room. And so that's the other dynamic that has to be worked through, is if part of your team is remote and part of your team has to be on site because of their job, you've got to balance some of those feelings that come up. And I know they come up because I have food manufacturing clients we work with, and some of the team is remote and some of them have to be at the plant 5-6 days a week. And there's that frustration growing of, well, they get to work remote. Well, yeah, but you also can't package fish from your couch. So, unfortunately, the job that you're good at is requiring you to be at a facility. And then to your second question, I think a lot more deal making can be done remote. A lot more relationships are built online. But I also see a trend where people are getting that are doing business remotely are say, hey, let's get together, right? There's just so much power and value in getting together in person. So,
yeah, no, I'm 100% on board with the hybrid approach as well. And I think it is interesting. You made a point that you can't really force 5 days a week in the office anymore if other companies aren't doing that, or if the employees have other options and they say, okay, you're going to maybe come to office, then I'm going to go work for the company down the street that's embracing remote or hybrid work, right? The employees can kind of force the employer's hand, which I think is interesting as a new wrinkle to things. All right, so I want to pivot back to kind of from the founder executive standpoint. How do you find that high quality employee, right? Because I think, and I don't know if you agree with the sentiment, that the growth of your business can really take off with the right hire. But you can also, you lose a lot of money and time if you make the wrong hire. You onboard someone, you train them, they don't work out, you have to let them go, and you have to start the search over again. So how do you prevent making the wrong hire, and what do you see working with all these businesses for the really the best candidates, the high quality candidates.
Yeah, and I do agree with that sentiment, actually, because the right team can really propel your business and the wrong team can bring you down. So I do agree with that. In terms of building the right team, I think one of the first things that has to happen is exuding a level of patience, right? So not being in such a hurry to hire just to put a butt in the seat, right? And really being willing to take the time to find the right candidate, while balancing that with making sure that the candidates, that once you do start finding people, you move quickly, because good candidates are going to go off the market very quickly. In terms of building the right team, it really starts with identifying your core values and mapping those out and understanding what are my core values as a business owner that I want to have in this business. Because when you start looking for talent that may not be the top talent, but it's the best fit because they're going to align with the core values. They understand the why. They understand what's expected in the job role. They still need to be, you still want top of your class, but you've got to bring those other aspects into the hiring process, because if you only hire for the hard skills, you will probably miss something. I've worked with a lot of people very, very talented in what they do from a hard skills perspective, but either they're very toxic, they've got all kinds of soft skill issues, they can't communicate, and that that brings down the entire aspect of their ability. So really taking a look at finding the best candidate from that perspective will start to increase your chance that you're bringing the right person onto the team. And let's face it, hiring, no matter how much, over time you hope you get better at it, but hiring always has the opportunity for it to be wrong. We're humans, right? So you just hope over time you improve your batting average.
Does a lot of it come down to just intuition? I'm sure you've advised on the hiring of lots of people throughout your career, and I'm sure you've hired a good amount of people for your company, Scaleocity Works. Does a lot of it just come down to interviewing in person and just kind of intuition and say, okay, yeah, I think this is the right fit? Is that a big piece of it?
It does, because you're looking for that connection, right? You're looking for that connection, and you're looking for, and it does have also a lot to do with the questions you ask and how you handle that conversation. But it also boils down to that connection, right? That person that you're meeting with, do you feel that connection there? Do you feel they're being genuine in their answers? And that overall takeaway from that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, sometimes it's a little easier if you're able to get a referral, like an employee says, hey, I'm going to refer this person for a job, or you're able to talk to another business owner and get a referral. Obviously, that kind of usually lowers the risk. It's always hardest when they're coming in off the street, off an Indeed or a LinkedIn application. So,
yeah, I think that's fair. And I'm curious too, with the types of businesses you work with, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if they are maybe on the smaller side or they're a growing company, they're lesser known. How do you get your name out there, right? Because I would imagine a high quality applicant is also interviewing you and saying, hey, what's this opportunity?
100%.
Like what bus am I getting on, and where is it going to take me from a earning and growth perspective? So how as an unknown or early stage company do you tell your story or make sure you're known in the marketplace?
Great question. So there has to be an employer value proposition, regardless of size of your company, big, small, medium. You as the employer have to be able to communicate why coming to work with us is good for your career and will be good for your life. Doesn't mean you're going to retire out of here or be here forever, but for the next chapter of your career, here's why coming to work at Scaleocity Works makes good sense for you. You have to have that employer value proposition. You have to have a story. And it's the same way that the founder back in 2007 got me to go work for him, right? He we sat down and he explained to me his vision, what he was building and where he wanted to take his company. That's what got me on board, because he was not known either, right? He sold me on his vision and where he was headed. And so that's such a key, important component. And then you're right, it's a two-way conversation. So, whether you're big, small, it's more important when you're small, but regardless of size, candidates should be asking some really thoughtful questions about the company. And it's not about, the question's not, what do you do here? The questions are more focused on, well, why is this role open, right? I want to know if somebody just got fired from it, if it's a new role, what happened? Why is this role open? How long has it been open? There's all kinds of questions that candidates can ask to get an understanding as to whether or not they're walking into a dysfunctional situation or not. And it's important that the founder or whoever's doing the interviewing and making the decision to hire is able to answer these questions honestly, because that's going to paint the picture as to whether or not they're walking into, it's maybe a startup, but it's a well-organized startup, right? It's not chaos every single day. So those are the things that need to happen, especially if you're smaller and an unknown brand and maybe not able to offer as big a package as some of the other bigger companies.
Yeah. And I think if you're not upfront about any dysfunction, right, and you do hire someone, I mean, it'll come to fruition eventually, right? They show up after a week and they say, crap, what have I done?
And that's a great point. And that's the other component to the employer value proposition, is being honest about it, right? If you're a smaller company, you may not be able to offer everything, but don't lay out that we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this, if you're not doing it. Because then that person joins the company under false pretenses. And all it takes is that for them to start telling all their friends, don't come work here. This doesn't happen. Nope, that's not true, right? And you couple that with the messaging boards that are out there now, the anonymous messaging boards where you can post anything about the company you work for. So you've really got to be very honest about what is your employer value proposition, what can you deliver to that new team member, and stand by your word.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have any examples from experience, but I can imagine that can kill a company in and of itself, the reputation. And if you can't hire, and then you don't have people to run the business and sell or whatever, and it kills the company, right?
The best example I can give you is, a company promising employees, well, we invest in your development, right? We're going to help you professionally develop. And then, they join the company, get through onboarding, and then just radio silence, right? There's no training, there's nothing going on. And so not fulfilling the professional development side. And the problem is, or the challenge is, employers sometimes think that professional development means spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, which it doesn't. There are lots of ways to develop your team without spending gobs of money, right? There's free online courses, there's webinars you can send them to, there's certain coaching models you can bring in for them. There's so many creative ways to develop employees without breaking the bank. And so that's the thing, is making sure employers know their options so that they can actually follow through on what they say with professional development, because professional development comes in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah. I mean, isn't it as simple as whoever the manager is or the founder is taking time to checking in, or, one-on-ones?
Yeah, that too.
As simple as that.
Absolutely.
And I'm curious as well, right? I think, and maybe you can talk to back when you joined an early age startup, at least from my perspective, if I were to join an early stage startup, there's that promise of growth and potentially ownership in the company. I'm not sure if you help at all with that in terms of hiring key members of the team and what an equity structure would look like, or any sort of ownership. I would imagine that's a big piece to getting the right person on board and incentivizing them to grow with the company, which in the end would benefit the founder as well.
Right. No, it absolutely is a big piece. And in this particular case, because of how he got his funding and how he started, we didn't have the problem with having to offer equity or privately held shares. We just paid really, really well because he had the funding in place in which to be able to do that. So we just paid really, really well. But when it was all said and done, I had 50 people reporting to me out of the 150. So I had a big chunk of the responsibility of employees.
Yeah. Maybe you could reflect on that a bit. I mean, what mistakes did you make? I mean, I assume that was relatively early in your career. What did you learn from that? Maybe anyone that's in that kind of position, whether it's at a startup or big corporate job, I mean, when you have a lot of people under you, how do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, I made a ton of mistakes, man. Yeah, that was a real learning era for me. Some of the key things I learned there. Number one is that you will never have all the facts to make a decision. That you will never have 100% of the facts of a situation to make a decision. At best, you may have about 75% of what you need, The rest of that's going to be filled in by intuition. So that was one of the lessons I had to learn, because I would hesitate to make decisions, especially when it came to personnel issues and anything I had going on staffing wise. I would hesitate to make a decision because I kept thinking I was going to get more information to strengthen which way I was going to go. And finally, the founder CEO pulled me aside one day. He goes, "You need to start making decisions faster, or you're not going to make it." I said, "Well, how do I make decisions faster without all the information?" He goes, "You never have all the information you're going to need." He goes, "You're going to need to rely on experience and intuition, and understand you're going to be wrong when you make decisions. And you need to, when you realize that decision is wrong, you need to own that and pivot." And the other lesson I learned is there's no right or wrong decisions. There's just decisions. You make a decision, either it works the way you anticipate or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then you need to pivot. The other thing that I learned through that experience is, going into that environment, it was black and white for me. Right? I don't want to know about your personal life. Don't care about what you do when you're not working. Don't tell me. Don't want to know. I really try to keep that barrier up. And I learned over time that's not possible, right? If you really want to get to know your team and understand what each person, what makes them tick, what they, where they want to go in life, what they like to do, you got to get to know them. And that means you're going to talk about personal stuff. You're going to learn, and there's value to that. There's value to learning their wife's name or their husband's name and what their kids do and what soccer. There's value to it because you start to humanize that relationship. So that was the other thing I learned there, and that was the mistake I made early on, was trying to keep that barrier up. And I didn't realize early on why I was struggling to build the relationships with the people that I was supposedly leading. So those are a couple of the key lessons I learned and mistakes I made early on.
No, those are both really good points. I'm thinking through this. If you had 50 direct reports, I'm assuming there were kind of multiple levels. You had managers who had teams that they managed. So can you maybe speak to managing managers, right? Because as you get higher and higher up, or if you are a founder, VP, or whatever it is, you're getting farther and farther away from, I guess, the front lines of the work that's actually being done, and whether it's dealing with customers, external or internal, and how you do that, right? I think that's hard to do, because at the end of the day, you're responsible for your team's work, but you're pretty disconnected.
Yeah, so that was part of the reason why I was on the road every week. So every 3 weeks a month, I was on the road. 1 week a month, I'd work out of my home office. So I'd fly into a market each week, and I'd work with that supervisor, that sales supervisor, and their team for the week. But yeah, then the other 2 weeks I was, somewhere else. So each week I would have a quick call with all my sales supervisors, and we'd go over the plan for the week. And they would also let me know what worked the previous week and what didn't work. And so we did that each week to kick things off. And then after that, I relied heavily on data, right? So, certain KPI reports that I'd get at the end of each week, and I'd look at our numbers, and, this way I would know, okay, we're going along the right path, or something is getting disconnected. And what I would also do, though, is, because I was in the field and my supervisors knew this, is that I would talk to all of their direct reports one-on-one. So, at the end of the day, just because they report to somebody else doesn't mean I can't have a conversation with them. And so I made a point to talk to everybody regularly. And it does get harder the bigger an organization gets. And so, if it gets to a point where you can't talk to everybody regularly, then it becomes really critical that you have the expectations clearly lined out with your direct reports that have their own direct reports. You have to have your expectations clearly lined out. You have to constantly reevaluate those expectations and make sure they're consistently being met. And you need to know what your dashboard needs to look like, right? What KPIs are you going to look at regularly? Like right now, I get a roll-up report from each of my team members. On Friday, I get that roll-up, and it's very simple. What worked well this week? What didn't work well this week? What bottlenecks do you have that we need to be thinking about? And do we have any clients or projects at risk? And then there's a color coding system, and it's green, red, yellow, and then an orange one. And green means I'm feeling good. Red means I am underwater, I'm stressed. Yellow means doing all right. And the orange one is it's just sigh. And so, when I see those color codes, I know where they're at and I can start navigating. So,
Yeah. I mean, you just explained all that. It's a lot. And I know I would say that people that go into management don't realize it until you're there, the challenge, the ongoing challenge of managing people. I mean, do you have any advice to managers out there, founders, when, when it gets difficult, when you're like, I just don't want to have this responsibility today? How do you deal with that? I mean, because if you are running a company or you're in a higher up position at the company, that doesn't go away as long as you're employed there. So, I mean, any
right.
insight into that?
Yeah, it's important to remember we're all human, right? We all have those days, myself included, right? Where you're like, the afternoon hits, you're like, I just don't want to deal with this. So I think it's important, number one, to recognize that, right, within yourself, to say, okay, I'm off this afternoon. Either I'm tired, I've dealt with too much. It's important to recognize where you are at personally, right? What is your emotional state? Where are you at? Because the worst thing you can do is try and deal with a complex situation when you're emotionally drained, pissed off, fired up, whatever, right? So you have to be able to check yourself. And, unless it's a, dire emergency, which, really, if you're running your business right, shouldn't happen all that often. Waiting 24 hours to address something is not the end of the world, right? Give yourself that day. So hopefully tomorrow you feel better, you're ready, and you're in the right headspace to deal with that issue, especially if it's a complex employee related matter. So that's my advice, is just know when to take a small pause on something.
Yeah. I think we seem to want results quickly, right? But I think people forget to look at this long term, like play the long game, right? Like you're not going anywhere. If your work's going to be there on Monday, if it's a Friday, and if you need to sleep on something, sleep on something.
Come
You
back
just
to
have
it.
to keep that in mind.
I'll never forget. I had a GM of a restaurant. This was a wonderful GM, really ran his business well, and he was having a tough week. And he called me because he had a server that had done some really stupid stuff. And unfortunately, the stupid stuff she did was with the owner of the restaurant's wife and her group of friends at their dinner table. And so he called me and said, we need to fire her right away. Okay. Why do you want to fire her right away? Well, she did this. Okay. Yeah, that's a problem. So can we fire her? I said, well, you can, but chances are you'll be sued before you know it. But it's the owner's wife. I said, what does that matter? Because the owner was calling him saying, I want her fired. She mistreated my wife. I said, I get all that, but she's never had a problem before. You've never had to discipline her before. She has no history of any infractions, nothing. It's not that she stole from the company or did anything egregious to meet the criteria. I said, so you could fire her. I said, but chances are she'll have a suit against you for wrongful termination. Mm-hmm. He goes, okay, let me think on it for 24 hours. Calls me back the next day. He goes, you're right. He goes, I'm just going to write her up. I'm going to coach her, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, right? I mean, if you fire someone, you just have to re-enter the hiring process, right? If you already have someone that doesn't have a history of corrective actions or whatever it is, and is a good employee, you're saving yourself the pain and money and time of having to search for somebody new, hire, train, etc.
Yeah, or get sued.
Yeah, or get sued. Well, yeah, could you speak to that a little bit? I kind of want to talk about you mentioned that you're in California. So is that different in California, right? So I'm in Nevada, and I believe Nevada is a right to work state, which means that you can be fired at any time for any reason. So I'm no expert on this. I would imagine you are. What are the differences, for example, between Nevada and California in terms of being able to just let an employee go?
So we are in what's called an at-will state, right? Which in theory means that the employer or the employee can end employment at any given point for any reason. But the at-will has been watered down so much over the years. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's not an at-will state. Because employers will often say, well, they've only been with me for 3 or 4 days. I can fire them right away. They're on probation. Well, technically, there is no probationary period in California, right? You can have an introductory period, right? There's a training and introductory, but the second they become a W-2 employee, all the rights, most of the rights from the labor codes attach. That's just the way it is. I've seen employees be on for a week and get fired, and sue for wrongful termination. Doesn't mean the lawsuit's legitimate, but they'll find an attorney that will take it. So, we are an at-will state. So that's why it becomes so much more important to try and put your systems in place that you hire right and don't have to go through it. But with that being said, when we do make the wrong hires or things aren't working out, it's about the documentation, right? Making sure that you are documenting what's going on, building that case file, trying to correct the situation before you do anything in terms of letting them go. So unless, of course, it's something egregious, right? I mean, as long as your handbook says, stealing is there are certain things that I feel comfortable somebody should be fired for on the first offense. You steal from the company, you punch somebody in the face, right? There's a whole list of reasons why you should be let go immediately versus no, let's work on this and try and course correct before we get to that point. So,
okay. Yeah. Interesting. So, I grew up in California, spent most of my life there, and I assume, I don't know, maybe you can clarify if you have as well, but I assume you work with mostly California-based businesses. Knowing what you know about doing business in California, and you're not a business that requires physical labor there. I know you mentioned restaurants, etc. If you have the ability to start your business in another state outside of California, if you're a tech startup, I mean, is that something you would recommend to a founder?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on the type of business you're trying to start. Despite how active our legislature is and despite how many laws they like to pass every single year, regardless of whether or not we need them, there is still a lot of opportunity in the state of California from an economic standpoint. But it is not the only place to build a business. So if you're going to be 100% remote, there's really no reason to start your business in California, right? I mean, if your team's going to be diversified all throughout the country or throughout the world, you don't need to be headquartered in California, right? Yeah. If you're planning on building something and selling it into a certain ecosystem, then you might need to start in California, right? I mean, Irvine is heavy with medical device manufacturing. If you're going in medical device manufacturing, your choices are Boston, Minneapolis. There's some in Texas and Irvine, and of course North San Diego County, right? So you've got hubs that you got to look at. So, I don't know that I would say don't start your business in California, but I think you need to look at what your business is, what your business model is, what type of employees you're going to need, and then of course, you can also look at the other things like tax implications, things like that. So I think it really is a case-by-case scenario. There's still opportunity here in California, despite all our problems, despite all the challenges we have.
Yeah, California is interesting. And I mean, I love growing up there, but it's such a big economy. There's so much opportunity. There's so many people, 6th largest economy in the world. But then on the flip side, there are these hoops that you have to jump through, and there's the tax situation. It's kind of, I don't know, it's an enigma. It's interesting, but
it is for sure.
So I want to pivot a little bit, and I know we were talking about this before we started recording, kind of, I guess, more current issues or hot button issues. I guess I'll call it like the generational shift of the workforce. Baby boomers, the biggest generation, I believe, in American history. Most, if not all of them, are retired, which is going to, if I'm understanding correctly, kind of leave a void in the labor market. Or now millennials are taking over and will be the largest generation in the workforce. I mean, so how do you see that affecting the labor market? And I mean, do you ascribe to the typical reputation or attribution of millennials of, not being that hardworking, ready to work generation?
Yeah, I definitely do not believe that is true. And as with anything, right, you're going to have good with the bad, right? So I have met through every generation of our workforce people that should be unemployed because they're toxic or there's something going on. So it's in every generation. So I truly do look at it on a person by person basis. I have worked with some phenomenal millennials that I've learned from that are super sharp. So definitely, I think the millennial generation got a bad rap. It's, that stigma got attached to them that I don't believe should have been attached. And if you know what you're looking for and you know what talent you need to build your company, you can find great talent in any of the generations. So, I firmly believe that.
No, I like that take. It seems to be kind of a stereotype of or the boomer. The boomers used
Totally.
that stereotype
Yeah.
against us, which
Yes, they did.
I mean, it's all good though. And then this is something I think it peaked more in COVID. And I'm just curious if you think there's any truth, right? You work with a lot of employers or you manage HR consulting, et cetera. Is there any truth to the great resignation or an unwillingness of the working age population in the United States just not wanting to work, or what's your take on that?
Um, I don't think it's 100% accurate. A lot of people do still want to work. A lot of people, that are intrinsically motivated want to work. I have not had any trouble filling positions when clients ask for help. So is there a group that doesn't want to work? Sure, absolutely. But I think every generation's probably had that. I don't think that's anything new, right? You're always going to have a group of people that want to find another way to make a living, whether it's illegal or just not working at all and living in their parents' basement and gaming all the time. But there are a lot of good people out there that still want to work.
Do you think it's more of just a talking point? I mean, hey, it gives a news outlet something to talk about or someone to write an article about. I don't know. It just
It's a
seems
talking point, and I also think it's an excuse, right? It's an excuse for business owners, hiring managers, whomever, to say, I can't find good talent. When it comes to hiring, recruiting, a lot is in your control. A lot is in our control. So I can't control people who don't want to work, but that's fine. I don't want them anyway, right? So focus on what you can control to find the talent you need. So I think a lot of it's an excuse for not being able to fill your roles.
Would you say too? I mean, in those instances, or I'm thinking of we talked about it earlier. You said as an employee or a job seeker, you need to be reaching out to founders or recruiting managers at companies you want to work for. I mean, if you're the founder of a company, I would imagine you hold a lot of weight, and you can do the exact same thing to the candidates that you want to hire. You shouldn't be just telling your HR person or your recruiter, "Hey, post this on LinkedIn and find me the best candidate." You should be messaging people directly that you have interest in. Is that fair? And
I
is that
agree.
something you recommend?
100%, because there's a difference. Recruiting and talent acquisition are two different things. Recruiting is, I got to fill a job right away. Somebody quit on me without, I didn't know, I didn't see it coming, whatever. So recruiting is an immediate need fill. Talent acquisition is about constantly building your pipeline. And one of the other lessons I learned when I went to work for the startup, it was interesting. I had never, at the big Fortune 500, we would have never dreamed of doing this. But as I would come across great people for the team that I'd meet out there, I would tell our owner, I said, yeah, I just met this person. Here's his resume. He'd look at the resume and go, offer him a job. I'm like, I don't have a job for him. He goes, make a job for him. He goes, because we're going to need him in about a year. He goes, so let's get him on now. Let's get him trained.
Yeah.
We'll allocate the budget for it. Get him on. I'm like, wow. And not everybody can do that. But talent acquisition is about constantly building that pipeline and networking and having those relationships. So when a role does come up where you're coming, you're going to need a role in about 3 months, you can reach out to that person, say, hey, you still at this company? What's going on? Let's connect for coffee. It's very much about relationships.
Yeah. It's about relationships. I mean, it's about selling, right? You're selling your company. It's about having that long-term vision. No, I think
and
that
knowing
those
what
are all
roles you're going to need to fill in 6 months, 12 months. It's about knowing what roles you're going to need.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. One other question I had in mind that is kind of, it's out there in the news space or being talked about online, AI, automation, the future of work. I'm not sure if you pay much attention to that or if your clients ask you about that. I don't know if you put any thought into how those things will shape work over the next 5-10 years.
Oh, I guess like everything, it's gonna shift how we work somehow. Question is, how does it shift how we work, right? If you start bringing AI into the workplace, what can it truly replace? And it's like the robotics conversation, right? Everybody said, well, robotics is coming. It's going to replace us. Well, it certainly may change how many people you need to hire. That is true. However, people also have to be trained and upskilled on how to maintain the robotics, how to run it. So AI will have an impact. The question is what type of impact and where does it go? So I don't keep up with it too much. I don't use Chat GPT too much.
I think that's the thing, right? Or ChatGPT was all the rage when it came out, and you play
Right.
around with it, and it spits out an essay, and you're like, "Wow, this is cool." But I mean, at least for me, it sounds like for you too. Where's the day to day use? I mean, it's kind of few and far between, at least for me currently,
Yeah.
which is interesting. So I want to pivot kind of back to you as we close out here, and specifically you as an entrepreneur with Scaleocity Works. And it sounds like you've been doing this for a while, and I'm just curious where you are in your entrepreneurial journey. Are you happy, and have you created the life you want? Do you have ambitious growth goals? I mean, where are you taking your company as you look to the future?
Very good question. Am I happy with where I've taken it so far? I am. It's been an interesting journey, and I'm grateful for it, because if I hadn't started my own business, 2020, 2019, 2020 would have been very difficult for me, because my mom got really sick, and so I spent a lot of time taking care of her, in and out of UCLA Medical Center, so a whole host of things. So I spent a good 6 months helping her with some of her real serious health issues. And so had I been at a traditional employer, I would have burned through all my sick leave, all my PTO, right? So I put the brakes on growing the company during that period to deal with family, and we just maintained, and luckily had a great team that was able to sustain. But that chapter is now closed, and so from where I'm at my entrepreneurial journey, I've learned to ebb and flow a lot more, right? It's not easy running your own business. And
Yeah.
one of the things that has finally, just this year actually, where I've finally started to understand and live with it, is that it's going to be an ebbing and flowing thing. There's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days, and I have to roll with it, right? It is what it is. And taking that mindset has made it a lot easier to get back in a growth focus. So we are absolutely looking to grow. As we go into next year, we're rolling out some learning opportunities. So I've got a strategic HR person coming on who has spent 20 plus years in the corporate world, more on the strategic HR side, not tactical. So she's very good at coaching, leadership development. So we're building out some management training courses, management accelerator courses. So we're starting to bring some learning and development into what we offer. And definitely utilizing the podcast and LinkedIn to continue to grow the brand and start to stack on some more clients. So we are actually ready to start growing again.
Yeah, I like that. And I like how kind of go full circle here. You've made a strategic hire to help you grow the business, which is what you advise, right? So I think that's
right.
Great. One question I want to close with, and then I'll give you the floor so you can let everyone know where to find you. Knowing everything that you know now, all the ups and downs, you've had the corporate career and you've had the entrepreneurial journey. For anyone out there that's thinking about starting a business, whatever it is, do you recommend that they take the plunge and go for it?
That is a really good question. I know it's easy to say, well, I'm just going to go start my own business. But at the end of the day, we all have bills to pay, and life catches up with you very quickly. So if you want to start your own business, absolutely, I would say go for it. But before you jump into it, see if you can start it as a side hustle, or you can start working on it while you're at your W-2. If it's not a direct conflict, of course, because the steady paycheck is a good thing, and stress levels go up tremendously when you can't pay your bills. So I would absolutely say go for the entrepreneurial side, because the days of spending 30 years at a corporation are almost non-existent. It does still happen to some degree, but the philosophy, or the belief that there's job safety doesn't exist. I don't care how big the company is. There is no job safety, right? We have to make sure we add value every single day. And sometimes even people who do add value every single day get caught up in mass layoffs.
Yeah.
So, but if you have a job that you're able to pay your bills, you're making a good living, and you can start a business idea that you have on the side and build it up to where all of a sudden, you over time you have enough revenue coming in that you can live off of it and make a smooth transition, I would recommend that path, especially if you've never started your own business before. Because there's a difference between bootstrapping a business and going out and trying to raise money for it. And there's a lot of stress if you bring in venture capital. Like, out the gate, you can't bring in venture capital, but even if you get family and friends around, right, that adds a lot of stress when you start playing with other people's money to build your business. So yes to entrepreneurship, but do it strategically.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. You got be careful what you wish for, right?
Right. It's not greener on the
Yeah.
other side always.
Yeah. No, hey, Brian, I want to appreciate or thank you for taking the time. I learned a lot. I think it was a great conversation. A lot of good
Yes, it's
nuggets
fun.
and
Thank you.
insights in there. So let's close. I'll give you the floor. Where can people find you? And yeah, any and all this information will be in the description as well, so people can easily, connect with you.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn. Also have my own podcast called Entrepreneur to Employer Podcast. You can find us on Apple or Spotify or any other platforms. So if you are looking to get HR and business insights, take a listen to the Entrepreneur to Employer Podcast. And you can always email me at brianm@scaleocityworks.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian, so much. And
Thank you.
yeah, I know it's Friday, so have a great weekend.
You too. Take care.
All right. Thanks.